Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Muhi Khwaja with American Muslim Community Foundation. Today on the Muslim Philanthropy Podcast, we have our special guest, Meymuna Hussein Cattan from the Tiyya Foundation. Welcome, Meymuna.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'd love to give our listeners a chance for learning more about you and your background. Please let us know where you reside and kind of your story to Tiyya Foundation.
Yes. My family and I live in Los Angeles in California. Um, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Tiyya Foundation, which I established with my mom back in 2010 as a homage to our refugee journey. My parents fled Ethiopia in 75 and met in a refugee camp in Somalia. That's where they got married, and I was born on the camp. And my dad was resettled first through the International Rescue Committee, and we reunited with him a year later. And growing up in California, I saw that my parents really believed that one day they were going to go back home to Ethiopia when things are better. And that wasn't the case. It took them a couple decades to really feel at home and rooted here. So through the Tiyya Foundation, the concept is to help the kids feel grounded and rooted here as we assist the parents. So it's a comprehensive wraparound program.
Wow, that is really inspiring and grateful to you to kind of do something that pays homage to not only your parents, but helping so many people in similar situations that you went to. I can see that being really meaningful.
Yeah, definitely. I was the first woman in my family to graduate from high school and first person in my family to get a master's degree. I did my
Right on.
undergrad at UCI. Thank you. My master's program, my thesis was focused on organizational development, and I researched organizations that primarily help immigrant and refugee families. And through my research, I found that Orange County was quite a desert with support at that time for refugee youth support. You were able to find programming in San Diego, um, Seattle, Washington, Minnesota, Atlanta, Georgia, a little bit of programming in LA County, um, but there was nothing really robust and focused on the PTSD of displacement and helping the kids really acclimate here. So I spoke to my mom, who has always been passionate and philanthropic around refugee support.
Hmm.
Um, I presented the idea to her, and then we launched the Tia Foundation in 2010. And like many immigrant communities, we weren't really focused on mental health. Like our mental health is community support and spirituality, but it caught up with my mom and it triggered her PTSD. So by 2012, she stepped down, and then I stepped in as the formal executive director.
Wow. What year were you graduating with your master's and doing the research?
Year she had to step down. So I
Mm,
had graduated that May, and by that fall, we were having conversations about mom's reoccurring nightmares and um, well being educated
yeah.
around refugee narrative, but the experiences of war are very traumatic and very real. So you'll notice in our branding, we're really focused on pivoting away from the refugee traumatic narrative and focus more on them being our neighbors, how they are resilient, ways that they are, just part of everyday life in Orange County and LA. So that was done intentionally because I didn't want to trigger our clients.
Yeah, that's really good insight to have because, coming from a less traumatizing background, my parents are still immigrants, but thankfully they were not fleeing war or persecution or anything like that. But I think there's similarities in trying to find community and focusing on those positive things, as you mentioned, likely make it an easier transition for them. So I think it's really insightful for you to kind of work from that narrative.
Yeah, definitely. And, being the daughter of the founder and, we found the organization together, but it was also her passion. I think I had to really work through a lot of imposter syndrome because I benefited from their sacrifices.
Yeah.
My parents lived in a refugee camp for 8 years before coming to the US. Dad was here in 83. By 92, he purchased a house. I mean,
Wow.
these are very hard workers,
Mm-hmm.
um, and very, resilient and savvy in their own ways. Even though I have like degrees on paper, I think that they've accomplished a whole lot with the little they were handed. And yeah, I guess just experiencing the refugee journey firsthand and just seeing like how resilient, I keep using that word, but
Mm-hmm.
I haven't found any other way to explain overcoming the traumas of war, and displacement. And but here we are, and Tia helps just over 200 families a year, and the youth receive pre-COVID was a lot of soccer and recreation and field trips, and
Mm-hmm.
we would do college tours. Now we're online with virtual support and tutoring, so adjusting around today's climate. And then with the adults, we're really focused on economic development and then hiring them for Tia's restaurant. So we have a restaurant in Los Angeles and our office is in Orange County. The restaurant hires refugee chefs and we curate their menu, and they receive 5% of the proceeds that we make that month.
That's
So
great.
extra revenue for their families. So we're really focused on education,
Mm-hmm.
recreational support, and economic development.
So when you started, like, how did you come up with the concept of the restaurant and kind of employing them and having utilizing their skill sets? That seems a really interesting concept for a nonprofit organization to think of those types of things outside of the box.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we started TIA at a time before the Syrian crisis. So a lot of people in Orange County didn't even know what the word refugee was or how people migrated here, and the term was used loosely in a very like biblical way. So we really focused on education and raising awareness. And then once people, understood refugees, there grew an anti-immigrant sentiment around 2016, 2017. So we really had to think about sustainability for the organization and how are we going to sustain the programs financially. And it was actually a client from Egypt who he was an asylee, and he suggested the idea of food. I was thinking like an international tea house would be really cool. Um, Around that time, Uber Eats and like these delivery apps were becoming more popular. So we considered food instead. I'm not a chef. I'm the taste tester. And I could develop the
That's the
business
best
model.
role, if you
Yeah,
ask me.
not a chef. But we hosted an audition, and we at the time had a social enterprise committee made up of board members, volunteers, our refugee clients. 12 chefs auditioned, and we were able to hire five. And that was January 2018. And then by January or February 2019, because of all the budget cuts and like the big changes and stuff, I was the only employee at Tiyya. Um, so I quickly had to figure it out. I joined a program to help startups, And I did a pitch competition with the Orange County Community Foundation and won
That's so
$50,000.
cool. Wow.
Yeah. So it was by winning that pitch competition, we were able to get the brick and mortar in LA, and also have a what's it called? Like a cloud kitchen that we work
Okay.
from
Yeah.
in Orange County. So after that, we developed some really strong partnerships, including Islamic Relief and Sun Family Foundation. So they really helped us weather this storm.
Hmm.
And I'd like to add that our grand opening was on March 21, the same week that the stay-at-home orders were put in place.
Wow. Yeah.
So we're a restaurant that never did indoor dining.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, hopefully, you'll be able to continue to sustain through online ordering apps and, takeout and everything like that. I know it's a really tough time for businesses, particularly restaurants. But, you talked a lot about collaboration and partnership. So, talk to us about some takeaways in terms of like the challenges and opportunities around collaboration.
I think challenges happen when okay, somebody mentioned this to me years ago, and I always you know saved it back in my mind. Your business or your organization reflects your inner development. So the more you could really work on asking
Mm,
for support and having very clear call to actions, um, you'll always be okay. And you always want to make friends before there's an emergency.
that's really
So
good advice. Yeah.
yeah, so I really recommend building the collaborations, make sure that it's a win-win type of partnership alliance that you have, and then keep track of like your financials, but like more of the foresight, looking into the next quarter or the next year. And if you know if there's going to be any gaps, that's the time to ask for support while you're developing these relationships.
That's great. I'm grateful that AMCF got an opportunity to learn more about Tiyya Foundation, especially when we did our COVID-19 response fund for nonprofits. And we were able to give $100,000 out to nonprofit organizations specifically, and then an additional $260,000 to mosques across the country. So we're really happy that Tiyya Foundation applied, that you received a small micro grant for that. And let us know and the listeners know in terms of what current projects you guys are focusing on to kind of shape out 2021.
Yes, so a lot of our clients, as we had mentioned to you in our proposal, they didn't qualify for the stimulus aid check because of their immigration statuses. So we continue to do. Um, you were able to help us provide the pantry items, and we were delivering them to different homes. Um, then there was a need for financial aid support. So
Right.
we raised $25,000, and that $25,000 helped us support 42 families with rental aid, utilities, any type of like financial support that they needed right now immediately. And our philosophy is, as a 501c3, we wouldn't write the check to the person because they'd have to fill out a W-9, and it looks like wages and all that.
Sure.
So as a nonprofit, what we are allowed to do is pay their rental service directly, or their gas, electricity bill directly. So that's been really great. And we had over 70 applicants, and we were able to help 42.
That's really phenomenal, and hopefully that's also something that, if the resources are there and the community supports Tia Foundation, that you can continue to do because obviously there's a big need for that as we are heading into almost a year of this pandemic and just families struggling to pay their bills and stay on top of things. So, really kudos to Tiyya Foundation and yourself for thinking through that and being able to help so many families.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been rewarding and it's also very shocking what's going on because they some of our refugee families that we've come across, they had the ability to not pay rent. I guess the landlord said you don't have to pay rent while you figure it out, but it wasn't communicated to them that they would owe the money later. And by owing the
Sure.
money, it increased their existing rent right now, um, or they would have to pay it in full amount. So it was very devastating in the
Yeah.
community to.
All of that can add up really quickly. Talk to us about just what advice do you have for people who are entering into this space to help refugees or do something similar to you with your experience that you've had over the last 10 years working in this area? What's some things that you'd like to share?
Um, from my experience, I think listening to what the families need, they tell you what they need, and when whatever population you support, you always want to do a needs assessment. So you assess what they need and then help meet them halfway. So for us, we've seen that they need support with economic development, educational support, basic necessities at times, but I haven't seen like a urgency around that because resettlement numbers have decreased. So there's a lot of families that are not newly arrived necessarily, but they've been here for quite some time and having trouble navigating and always looking for you know, I guess like culturally appropriate ways of
Mm-hmm.
supporting and working with them. Yeah.
Right. And, as a grant maker, and kind of like you said, especially since the Syrian crisis in like 2016, um, we've seen more grant making done specifically for refugees. And hopefully, if there's any role that AMCF can play to connect you with other funders in the space, that's something that we would love to do. And I know there's grant makers concerned for refugees. I think is one
Okay.
main one,
Are you
and
connect are you connected to them directly?
yeah, yeah.
You
So
are? Okay.
I'll definitely make a introduction for you and just something to consider being part of that network so that you're just plugged into what the mainstream philanthropy is saying about the issue. And, as we talk about Muslim philanthropy as a subset of that, we want to make sure that more Muslim led initiatives are getting funding and have access to that funding. Um, so, one of the things that I always love asking our guests on the show is simply, what are your favorite places to give your zakat and sadaqah to? And of course, Tia Foundation is probably high on that list, but what are a few others that you like to support?
Yeah, it's kind of a long list. The number one that always comes to mind is Islamic Relief. Being
Mm-hmm.
born in a refugee camp is something that's very personal to me, and they're always like on the ground directly working with communities. I really appreciate that. And also working within the refugee resettlement world. So like groups like the Tiyya Foundation and Mary's List, we're not formally resettlement agencies. We would be the people that come in as like post resettlement support and building
Mm-hmm.
community and helping them navigate. But before that is the resettlement agency, National Rescue Committee, or IRIS. It's the Immigrant Refugee Services. It's an interfaith organization.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Yeah, so there's different avenues and different ways that I stay passionate and anyone at any time that's working on the border. So if I get a link for that, I make a donation immediately. I don't think twice about what group is helping by the border. It's if they need my assistance and I got that email or that link, I'm gonna contribute.
That's really generous and really great to see the different causes that you support. Um, in terms of how people can learn more about Tiyya Foundation, what are things that you need help with at Tiyya Foundation? If you want to share just kind of some closing thoughts on Tiyya Foundation and how people can get involved.
Yes. So we used to have a very robust list of ways to volunteer. And now that we're addressing our virtual platforms, we're looking for people who are a little more tech savvy to help us really build that out some more. And we're looking for translators. So if you could speak Afan Oromo, Amharic, Arabic, Farsi, Dari, like any of the languages of the families that we support. That would be really helpful. I actually have a list here of the countries. So Tia has helped this year families from Iraq, Syria, Egypt, Russia, Palestine, Afghanistan, Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan, Indonesia, Kamala. So if any of these countries or languages are familiar to you, we do need support.
Wow, that's really phenomenal. Just to see that you have this depth of commitment to all these different families coming from all of these different countries. One resource in terms of translation services that I will share with you as well is called Tarjimly. So if you haven't heard of them, definitely check them out. And they provide translation services, and they actually employ refugees to do the translation services to one another. So it's a really cool concept.
So
Um,
that's wonderful. Yeah, I would love to get connected to them. Thank you.
yeah, of course. So I'm glad that as a fellow Amically member, we were able to connect, and people should learn more about Amically as well. And really grateful for your time to share a little bit more about Tia Foundation with our listeners, and we're looking forward to staying in touch.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
You got it.